Could this be a sneak peek? I bet you thought we were going to talk about that Kohler engine. Nope. We're going to talk Clinton. Yep, we're going back to our roots here on this channel with the Clinton motor. Today's project is to refurbish this 1290 Clinton, which came off an RJ35 wheel horse tractor. The individual that owns this motor, after discussion with that individual, we're just going to refurbish it. He has it on an RJ35. He runs and drives it. And I didn't think that a full rebuild would be really economically friendly. And the reason for that is the parts for these engines are starting to go through the roof. They're getting harder and harder to find, especially standard pistons, valves, oversized valve stems, or the valves with the oversized stems on it, which this engine probably could use, but you know, again, they're kind of expensive. And forget about finding crankshafts for these motors. Now, with that being said, I'm sure there's somebody with a cache of those NOS crankshafts sitting around somewhere. Let's be honest. With the modern day internet, everybody can be proven wrong. So let's just get that out there as a caveat. But to the general population, these crankshafts are getting more difficult to find, let's put it that way. So there is some rocking in the valves, stems themselves, but we're just going to leave that alone. We're not going to go crazy. Somebody at one time, let's just turn this motor over. Somebody at one time replaced the intake valve, and it is in really nice shape. So I don't see the point in tearing that out. Now, the exhaust valve does look like an original exhaust valve. But again, it looks like it's in really good shape. I did roughly clean the top of the block with a cookie wheel. I went over the valves. I wire brushed underneath the valve seats, cleaned everything up, and I'm just going to leave that. I'm not really going to get crazy. Now, the bore is quite glazed over. It's like a mirror. So I am going to pull the piston, the rod. I'm going to leave the crank in the block, cover it up. I'm going to hone the block real quick and then re-gap rings. I may replace the rod in this motor just to make sure that the rod clearance is up to snuff. This does have a Type 2 ignition. We've talked about the 2 different ignition systems, or 3 different ignition systems that Clinton motors could come with. This is a Type 2, which is the latest version. It uses a set of points from a Tecumseh engine. So we're going to go through there, clean that up. He's asked that this ugly kill wire be replaced, so we'll go ahead and replace that with a nice black wire. The coil is firm. There's no squish to it, so we're going to leave that alone. This looks like a fairly new condenser. The wiring looks fairly nice. This engine did run. It smoked a little bit at throttle up, so that's basically why we're just going to refurbish it. So the ignition itself is probably fine. It runs, it drives. I am going to take this apart and clean the points and reset them. We'll clean the end of the crankshaft. I will check the valve lash, but I believe it's going to be fine because there really wasn't any particular issue on power. This engine ran quite well. These are known as Clactons, so the tippity tap of the valves on the block, that's totally normal. I am going to clean out the bottom of the oil pan, make sure that's all squeaky clean. I've already dumped the oil, actually. So for the first part, let's get this thing tipped over. Oh, and then where is it? Looking over the parts, I can't necessarily find it. I'll have to look for it. I had the carburetor. I got the carburetor somewhere. We're going to dunk that, get that all good and cleaned up and ready to rock. Is it over there? No. All right, I'll find that. But anyways, so that's what it is. So let me pull the pan and let's take a look at what we got inside. Okay, so at first glance, everything looks standard form. Nothing is out of place. There's nothing that looks weird. Camshaft looks like it's in good shape. The crankshaft gear, the cam gear, all that looks good. We peer down in there. The governor looks good. There doesn't look like any excessive wear. We do have the tapered roller bearings. They look fine on both sides. We look down. Basically, the block is fairly clean inside. I don't see anything of concern. The dipper here is not, there's no marks on the dipper, so nothing's been kicked around in there. So overall, I'm quite happy with this. It does look like at one time, nah, probably not. The rod bolt retainers don't look like they've been peeled back once before, so I'm thinking that the rod is in place. There is, let me just put that down, there is some play on the rod. I mean, it does rock around a little bit, so I think a rod replacement is probably going to be good for this. In this direction, there really is no play, but in this direction, side to side, there seems to be some excessive wear on there. Not even, I'm not going to say excessive. It's just, it knocks around, you know. So just to be safe, we'll swap out the rod. I got plenty of them in stock. That's actually one of the parts that you can find very easy is the rods. The oil is standard form. It's fairly clean, but you can see some shiny particulate, as they would say, in there. So we're going to clean out the bottom of this oil pan. We'll get all this sludge and crap out of it. And then we'll get this thing honed. So let's get the rod out of it. Let's take a look at the bore, and then we'll go from there. Now that we have the rod out, we can take a look at the crank. The crank does look like it's had some stuff spun around in it at one time. It's hard to really show you on the camera, but in general, let's see if I could just kind of maybe make a shadow. Yeah, there you go. But you can see right there, let me just do that. Let it maybe focus here. There is a small little, or there was a small little rust spot at one time right there. You can see it. Overall, not in bad shape. You know, definitely an engine that has some hours on it. Now, when I look at the rod, I think that's a little better. You can see that there's some striations, light striations in the rod cap here, and then also in the corresponding rod end. So, you know, this thing's been run with dirty oil by somebody at one time, and I stand corrected. This rod looks like it's been replaced at one time. This particular rod, which now I'm not 100% certain, but does look like a replacement style rod. It looks like a replacement Kohler. Sorry, I've been working on so many Kohler engines. Clinton rod. And you can tell by just the graininess of the casting. And also, when I took this apart, this particular bolt retainer was really chewed up. So on the bottom side, that's why I couldn't see it until I started to take it apart. So I'm thinking that the rod at least has been replaced. The rings are worn. You can see that right there. They're worn down. There are some scuffs in the piston where it's, you know, tapped the bore. Unlike a Kohler engine, these pistons aren't directional. In other words, they don't need to go one side towards the flywheel. The only thing that is pertinent is the oil hole for the rod needs to be pointed towards the camshaft, and we'll make sure that gets done. So we're going to put a rod in it. We're going to get a new set of rings, or 10-over rings, and then I'll end gap them to specification. I'm going to hone the block with the crank in. I'm just going to cover the crank up with, oops, sorry, I better get in it. I'll cover the crank up with some paper towels to make sure that that doesn't get touched or anything like that. We'll also fill the area in with some paper towels so that way it catches any of the little drippings that may come into play. I'm actually gonna hone it on its side so that way we can try to keep as little junk getting into the bore, and we should be all set. And then we can put this thing basically right back together with some assembly lube and some clean everything, then assembly lube it. We can put it all back together, torque it all into place, and then we can move on to the next step. All right, so with the piston out, we can take a look at the bore. And as you can tell, it's pretty shiny in there. There are a couple little light scores, which is totally what you usually see. So I'm going to get the hone out. We're going to hone this cylinder. Not going to go crazy with it, but we're definitely just going to clean it up, and then we're going to clean the complete inside of the block. Get it all good and clean, and we'll be in a position to start end gapping those rings. Now with the cylinder honed, it looks pretty good. Now there is still a little bit of a ghost ring right around here. There was a sizable lip, a lot larger than I anticipated, at the top of the bore. And really, ultimately, this block probably should have been bored 10 over for a new piston and new rings to be fitted. But again, cost structure, you know, you're not going to get a piston less than $100. I wouldn't sell any of my 10 overs for less than $100. Let's put it that way. That might be high to some people, but you just don't see them. You just don't find them. You don't even find standard pistons for these stupid motors. So with that, that's about as good as it's going to get. I don't really want to keep working at it because there's a little ghost line right there. The ghost line over here is pretty still sizable. I don't know if I can show you. Let's see. Yeah, you can still see it. It's still sizable. So the bore itself is got some wear in there. But for an engine that's not going to get worked hard, in other words, you're not going to be mowing the lawn every single weekend. You're just going to be, this individual is just going to be putting around tractor shows and stuff. That's, in my opinion, is more than acceptable. I'm sure somebody will flame me on that, but I've done this countless times, and these engines just run fine. All right, time for a good cleaning inside and out, and then I'm going to start sizing up the rings. So I went downstairs, pulled out a ring set. This is a 10 over ring set for a 1290 Clinton. This is old school. Got the old Hastings ring set. And the Clinton, where is it? Piston ring groove end gap. And let's move this box here. So where's that again? Ring end gap cylinder for the 1200, 7 to 17 thousandths. So I dropped these two, the top ring and the bottom ring, top ring and the second ring have to be gapped. I've already, the oil control ring, or the chrome vent ring as they call it, that has more than enough clearance. It's like 12 in the bore, so I'm not going to have to mess around with that. So I'm going to end gap these to 7 to 17 thousandths. Hopefully it'll be right around 10 thousandths. That's what I'm going to be shooting for. Clean them up, clean up the piston, put the rod, the new rod on it, clean up the crankshaft, make sure everything's good, and let's put it together. The new rings are installed on the piston, and the new rod is installed. Everything is assembly lubed up, at least this section, the pin and the rod. I'm going to go and clean the bore out again, make sure the inside of the block is good and clean, clean the crankshaft journal again, just to make sure that's all set, lube it all up with oil, put it in this ring compressor, and then drop it down in the bore, keeping in mind that the oil hole has to be facing the camshaft. All right, let me get that in there, and then we'll flip that block over. The piston and the rod dropped right in without issue. It cycles up and down nice and smooth. There's no marks in the bore which indicate that we had a problem with the ring or anything to that effect. If I take the engine, which I'm going to try right now, is just tip it over. There we go. And we can take a look on the inside. The rod is in place. The bolt retainers are bent into place also. So this thing is all set to go. I'm just going to wipe it all out again, clean it all up, and then I'm going to reinstall the oil pan, get the head ready, reinstall the head. The oil pan is torqued into place, got a new gasket in there. Clean the head area again, dribbled some oil in the bore just so it'll keep those rings lubricated, because it'll be a little while, a couple weeks before I get this thing started. I just had a little time today. Cleaned all the head bolts, surfaced the head, and you can tell this head was pretty warped because on my surface plate it was just starting to kiss the center of the combustion chamber, and we still didn't get it perfectly flat. You can see right here in the corners, but I didn't want to go too much more. Just really didn't want to go too much more on that head. So I got it real close. I'm not running a copper head gasket, or the owner is not going to run a copper head gasket. I'm going to run a stock Clinton gasket. So I'm going to get that head in place, get that all torqued down, and then we're going to tackle the upgrade or the refurbing of the ignition system. So the head's torqued into place, 200 inch-pounds. As the Clinton manual indicates, I cleaned and put the breather system all back together. So that's all set. I popped the cover off the points. The points are like brand new. Somebody's replaced those just recently. And I did gap them using the Clinton cover, because that's what that little tang is for, is actually for gapping your points. And it's 20 thousandths, so I'm not going to mess with that. Everything else looks like it's in good shape. I am going to rip off the kill wire right now and swap that to a black wire. I wiped up a little bit everything in this area. So for day one, that's pretty good. This should be almost all set to run. I just have to do the carburetor, but the carburetor I'm going to drop into my cleaning solvent and let that sit overnight. All right, we'll be back. Okay, so I have the auxiliary gas tank just bungee strapped to the sawhorse. I got to connect the fuel line real quick. The carburetor's just cleaned and all reassembled. I put all the tins back on, and that is actually a muffler that came off one of my RJs because I couldn't find another one. So I just screwed it on there real loose, or loosely for just this initial startup. I'm going to hook up this piece of wire to the throttle to keep it in the idle position, so that way it's not going to, take off on me or anything like that. So let me get this stuff hooked up. I will put fuel in the tank, and we will pull the cord. So I breathed a little bit more life into this Clinton. It was a quickie. Didn't want to get totally knee deep in a total engine rebuild and spend hundreds of dollars getting this thing to run probably about as good as it's running right now. You heard it. No smoke at initial startup, no smoke at throttle up. I let it idle at different various RPMs for about 20 minutes or so. I dumped the oil. The oil did have, the classic little bit of shine to it for an initial startup motor without an oil filter. Changed the oil, and that's it. I'm going to call this project done. I already texted the owner of the motor that it's all set. All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your interest. If you like these kinds of little projects, please subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, have a great day.